And with that said, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. So Eddy del Rio is joining us today from not so sunny Mississippi. He has had a winding academic road that included training as a classical pianist and conductor, a Master of Music degree and Doctor of Musical Arts degree from University of Cincinnati. He taught music in multiple places before he became an independent consultant to the U.S. Army in the use of global positioning systems, and then became a manufacturing engineer for Systems Processing and Engineering Corporation that contracted out to the U.S. Air Force. And then his career took another turn when he enrolled at St. Louis University School of Medicine at the age of 41, completed a residency in family medicine, and now practices medicine with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. So a true Renaissance man. He became interested in the analogies between the objects of human invention and similar functions in the human body, and has written many articles on the subject. He is a member of the RTB Visiting Scholar Community, and he's going to be talking to us unapologetically on apologetics. So you can take it away, and we look forward to it.
Thank you thank you, Kevin, for that warm introduction and warm welcome by you and the other members, and to those that are joining online. I'm seeing some old names and faces that lift my heart, and I'm grateful for that. I do have a little bit of history in Chicago. I went to first and second grade at Schwartz Elementary in Villa Park. Villa Park's fame is Ovaltine, for those old enough to remember when we used to put a scoop of that in our milk and drink flavored milk. That's about it for Chicago for me. I'm going to go ahead, proceed, and open up and post my presentation. Okay. So what we find is a natural explanation for the existence of the universe of life, and conscious morality serves as an impediment for people to seek the Creator and to worship Him. The above demonstrates an example of the almost universal objection to Christianity in modern, industrialized, scientific nations on the basis of the, quote, facts of evolution. Let's look at a couple examples. One on the cosmic level. The protagonist is, of course, Christ in the wilderness, found in Matthew 4. The antagonist, the enemy, the devil, a spiritual being who knows the truth of God's existence and power, and that of his eternally begotten Son, who is the creator of all, including Satan himself. Can someone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can someone see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So note that the method of Jesus engaging with Satan was to quote Old Testament scriptures, which in Ephesians is referred to as the sword of the Spirit. That's very significant, and we should contemplate what it signifies regarding the importance of the Hebrew scriptures. Another example of engagement at the human level, engagements by Paul during his missionary journeys, which is found in the Acts of the Apostles. If he was talking to Jewish audiences, it says he argued, he reasoned from the scriptures, as they both shared the same basis. If he engaged non-Jewish or Gentiles, he would appeal to creation and general revelation, as is spoken of in Romans chapter 1. So when he was in Lystra, the Greeks of the city worship Zeus and Hermes. Paul makes an appeal to the living God who made heaven and earth and sea and everything in them. And when he's in Athens, meeting in the Areopagus with all the intellectuals who spent their days doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas, Paul makes an intellectual appeal to their, quote, unknown God, the God who made the world and everything in it. And he also quotes Greek poets. So we find pre-evangelism is based upon the least common denominator, and it must be appropriate to the audience. Apologetics comes from the Greek apologia, which refers to speaking in defense. We have two examples from classic literature, the Apology of Socrates, and that's by Plato, and it's in his dialogues, and it presents this speech of legal self-defense that Socrates presented. And then we have the Apology of Socrates to the Jury, and this is by Xenophon of Athens, and it is a Socratic dialogue about the legal defense that the philosopher Socrates presented at his trial. In both cases, the Greek word that refers to these defenses is apologia. Christian apologetics is the making of a case for the truth of the Christian faith. We find that same Greek word used in 1 Peter 3, where it says, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Now, in the popular New International Version, the apologion word is translated as to give an answer, but understand its background. And we're, of course, exhorted to speak the truth in love. Apologetics is biblical. Jesus appealed to miracles and to fulfilled prophecy to argue that his claims were true. The apostles, in dealing with other Jews, used fulfilled prophecy, Jesus's miracles, and especially Jesus's resurrection, again, to argue that he was the Messiah. Paul, in dealing with non-Jews, as we've already said, appealed to nature and appealed to eyewitness testimony of Jesus's resurrection to argue the existence of God. Why is apologetics important? I highly recommend the book, a small book, On Guard, Defending Your Faith with Reason and Precision by William Lane Craig. He explains that it has the following purposes. One, in helping to shape culture. If the gospel is to be heard as an intellectually viable option for thinking men and women today, then it's vital that we as Christians try to shape American culture in such a way that Christian belief cannot be dismissed as mere superstition. It also strengthens believers because it helps us know why we believe as well as what we believe. And it gives us confidence in sharing our faith with others. Apologetics can help us to keep the faith in times of doubt and struggle. And it makes you a deeper and more interesting person. It can also help in winning unbelievers, because there is a certain minority of persons who will respond to rational arguments and evidence, who, though relatively few in number, are often hugely influential upon their conversion. We can think of examples like C.S. Lewis, Lee Strobel, and even partly Antony Flew. If you don't know that name, we'll introduce you to him later. I want to just mention a couple types of apologetics, and this can be found in the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics by Norm Geisler. We got classical apologetics that stresses arguments for the existence of God, as well as the historical evidence supposing the truth of Christianity or supporting it. Evidential apologetics, which stresses the need for evidence, rational, historical, archaeological, and even experiential, and we'll be adding scientific, in support of the Christian truth claims. Historical apologetics, of course, stresses historical evidence as the basis for demonstrating the truth of Christianity. Presuppositional apologetics presupposes the basic truth of Christianity and then proceeds to show that Christianity alone is true. This is one that I have certainly not really engaged in. Experiential apologetics appeals to experience as evidence. I find the first three are the strongest methods of apologetics, and myself really don't use the last two. But then there is the personal apologetics, what some have called the fifth gospel, and that's you. You may be the only Bible some people read. There's a book called The Fifth Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you. And it starts by quoting the 19th century British evangelist Rodney Gypsy Smith saying, there are 5 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian. But most people never read the first 4. So this brings me to the subject of pre-evangelism, which I consider all that we do to till the ground for planting the seed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can use apologetics and philosophy in order to engage intellectual objections, like I like to introduce the problem of no evil for naturalists. Atheists love to engage theists, especially Christians, with, quote, the problem of evil. But in my view, the problem that a naturalist and an atheist has is that evil is evident in the world, yet their worldview has no means to warrant or even examine morality and oughtness. I like to use the phrase, morality cannot be found in the periodic table of elements. If you can, you make it a contest of worldviews rather than individuals whenever possible. We also wish to critique orthodox neo-Darwinism scientifically in order to close certain doors of fantastical thinking. Some of the effective ways to do that is by reviewing subjects of irreducible complexity, which part of my presentation is going to have, as well as complex specified information, which again, my presentation will have. And we wish to present problems for philosophical naturalism in order to open doors of alternative explanations. Fine-tuning of the universe and life is one of the ways that we can approach doing that. The ultimate historical question, of course, is, did Jesus rise from the dead? And if so, it changes everything. I often like to bring discussions back to this when trying to make an incredulous claim about healings or walking on water, etc. Pick your miracle out of the Bible, doesn't matter which. I argue that if Christ actually rose from the dead, then the probability of those other events having occurred goes very, very high. And so I want a discussion about the resurrection of Jesus. Some more recent powerful apologetic approaches to this question are the minimal facts argument that Gary Habermas and Craig Hazen have developed. And here I include a link, which to the audience will be one reason why you might wish to secure a file of my presentation afterwards so that you can use the link therein. And you'll note the asterisk at the end of this, the title, The Resurrection Argument That Changed a Generation of Scholars, which Dr. Habermas gave at UC Santa Barbara. I've made for myself a summary that includes annotations, and I'm happy to make such summaries available to others if you send me an email. Then the subject of the Gospels and Apostles is reliable eyewitness testimony. Richard Bauckham's Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, published by Erdsman in 2006, is an academic tome that is fantastic. However, it's academic and it's not easy reading. It's not meant really for popular audiences, but one of its principal arguments was made very accessible in presentation by Dr. Peter Williams in a YouTube that you can see where he presents it. It's really strong. Again, I have that asterisk and alerting folks that if you want a summary, reach out to me and I'll get one to you. Undesigned coincidences in the New Testament, as most recently rediscovered by Timothy McGrew and expounded by his wife, Lydia McGrew, both PhDs, in her book, Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences in the Gospels and Acts, revives an argument for the historical reliability of the New Testament that has been largely neglected for more than 100 years. What is this? An undesigned coincidence is an apparently causal yet puzzle-like fit between two or more texts, and its best explanation is that the authors knew the truth about the events they described or alluded to. Now, this is generally quite unknown by most folks, so I've included an example I want to share. They write, in John 13, where Jesus got up after eating the Last Supper and washed the disciples' feet. It just sort of happens out of the blue. Reading only John, you might think that Jesus has thought of this idea for no special reason. And it does raise the question, why did he do that just then? If you go over to Luke 22, though, there is it says that the disciples had been bickering at that very meal about who would be greatest in the kingdom. So the foot washing in John is explained. Jesus was giving them an example of humility and service when they had just been competing and fighting. Luke never mentions the foot washing, and John never mentions the argument. Those two passages have a coincidence in the other direction. In Luke, Jesus scolds the disciples for bickering and says of himself that though he is their master, I am among you as the one who serves. This is a slightly weird expression in Luke because he hasn't done anything especially servant-like. But if you read about the foot washing in John, you see that he has just dressed himself like a servant and washed their feet. He has literally been among them as one who serves. So the two passages fit together extremely tightly because of what each one contains and each one leaves out. Luke explains John and John explains Luke. That's an example of an undesigned coincidence. And I highly recommend their book. Teamwork. Let's talk about teamwork. The U.S. Army has infantry, artillery, aviation, many subspecialties and support. An orchestra has a string, brass, woodwind, percussion sections, as well as librarian, stage manager. Don't forget the conductor. Jesus's team was dissimilar also. Peter, rash. Andrew, ready to go and do. John, loving. Thomas was skeptical and requiring to see the same extraordinary evidence that the others had. Let me pause and say something more about this. I heard a sermon in which it was noted that the idea was Thomas was suffering such grief. He had such despair that he couldn't even stand to be with all the others when they gathered together in the upper room. And that's why he was absent and didn't see the appearance of Jesus. So they, of course, engaged him afterwards, and all he wanted was the same thing they had been given. He gets a bum rap for being called doubting Thomas. Later, Paul, an intellectual. Each had strengths, talents, and weaknesses. Christendom has itself its branches and denominations, each emphasizing, in my opinion, some aspect or trait of the triune God that loves humanity, and each worships him in different styles and manners, even if each also has only part of the truth and some error. My own walk includes Reformed, Wesleyan, and now Anglican communion. The current battle for truth and souls has its team of partners, preachers, philosophers, scientists, artists, organizations like RTB, and others, each using its specialty to help liberate trapped minds and souls and to enable the glory of God and his kingdom. Paul said it this way, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all, that I might win the more. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." And just a quick comment. Under the law meant Jewish. Out of the law meant non-Jewish, not necessarily outlaws like we might think. Plus, I put in very small text the asides that Paul is so fond of that sometimes disrupt the line of thinking in his statement. Prove it to me. Where's your extraordinary evidence? I want to say a few things about extraordinary evidence. First, it's bestowed, not produced. Therefore, requesting it of another is really kind of nonsensical. And that can be brought up when someone's engaging you for extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary evidence is neither durable nor transferable. Therefore, one cannot prove that it did not occur in the past. So, when God appeared and spoke to Abraham, there was no way he could share that event with others. But at the same time, that doesn't deny that he had been appeared to and spoken to. Extraordinary evidence nonetheless leaves traces of its effects. Now, we need to search for those effects. Effects on individuals, the early disciples, Saul, who became Paul, James, the brother of Jesus, who thought at first he's out to lunch, but later would become the leader of the church in Jerusalem. Effects on movements, the birth, persistence, and development of Christianity, or why we know anything at all about an itinerant Jewish carpenter in the backwoods of the Roman Empire. Effects on culture. I love to ask some. You were born roughly how many years after Christ? Yeah, 2023 means something because of Jesus of Nazareth. Apologetic training recommendations. I've availed myself of both of these, and I recommend them to all. Talbot School of Theology at Biola has a certificate in Christian apologetics. The home program consists of 3 courses. Each course of the program includes 8 unique audio lectures by top apologists, as well as course notes and a certificate quiz. And the certificate can be earned by completing all 3 courses, and there's a link to it. Reasons Institute, the premier content provider of online science apologetics courses, aims to equip people with cutting-edge reasons to believe in the God of the Bible, strengthening their faith and empowering them to engage scientists, skeptics, and atheists. There are 3 tracks. You can do it for just personal enrichment. You can do the certificate in science apologetics, and you can even earn college credit. And there's a link there. These are both great, and I highly recommend them. Well, what is my part of the team? As a physician, my specialty is founded on the amazing anatomy and physiology of the human body and how it intersects with pathology and its treatments. My apologetical approach has been to make analogies between that which is inescapable, a product of intelligent agency, that is, human inventions, and features of our bodies, and do so in such a manner as to leave a strong inference to the greatest intelligent agent, the Creator God. My method, I explore parts, functions, integrations, dependence, specified parameters, fine-tuning, irreducible complexity, system of systems, purpose, or teleology, inadequate material causation, improbabilities approaching impossibilities, given the resources in this universe. Let's see one example of an irreducibly complex function. Background. Okay, first let's explore movements. Movements come in two types. There's translational movement, movement through space in 3 dimensions. You can think of them as moving in the X, Y, and Z. Forwards and backwards, up and down, like you're in an elevator, and sideways, like the famous entrance Tom Cruise makes in the movie Risky Business. Movement through space, that's translational movement. There's also rotational. Here you move in a fixed location about the 3 axes. X-axis, longitudinal, like a boat tipping back and forth from starboard to port, or an airplane rolling. And I'd like you to do this. Tip your head as if you're draining each ear of fluid that you have in there. Okay? Now, the y-axis, laterally, like a boat pitching fore and aft as it rides up and down swells. So tip your head up and down to indicate yeah. Then the z-axis, or vertical axis, going through your spine. A spinning ice skate, we call this yaw in an airplane or a boat. Tip your head left and right to indicate no. No. Okay. That's an exploration of rotational movement in the 3 axes. That serves as background. So here's the example of obvious intelligent agency, the human invention of the gun stabilizer. In World War II, Sherman tanks had the ability to train their gun on a target. So the problem, as tanks move on bumpy and sloped terrains, the main gun points in several directions. Therefore, with rare exception, the tank has to stop to shoot, making it extremely vulnerable to attack by other tanks or anti-tank artillery. The solution, the tank gun stabilizer. American research engineer Clinton R. Hanna invented a gyro stabilizer for tank guns in the early 1940s. This device allowed American Sherman tanks to drive and shoot at the same time by keeping the gun barrel fixed on the target with automatic up and down movements. This enabled gunners to score a high percentage of hits. He was awarded a presidential citation in 1942. Now, I do want to say this is just the first iteration of gun stabilizers, and all it did was gun barrel in the up and down axis. Not like our Abrams do today, where the tank can just go all crazy every way, and that barrel stays on the top. The design had 4 functional parts, and you can read about it in Popular Science, September 1944. It had an electrically motor-driven gyroscope rotating at about 12.5 to 16,000 RPM to serve as a fixed reference in space. It had a motion detector in relation to the gyroscope that would produce variable electronic currents. It had a signal analyzer and generator. And then it had an actuating hydraulic system, a hydraulic pump that responds to the electronic generator through plumbing to a cylinder and piston assembly that adjusts the altitude of the gun barrel. Here's what Mr. Hanna looked like in a basic image of his device, and bring to your attention, okay, this is the electronic motor-driven gyro. And here we have something that hangs right down here. Down here, we're going to see in a moment what they call the Silverstadt contact leaves. And notice there's 2 of them, one on one side, one on the other. And what's going to happen is that this device, as the tank changes its up and down attitude, is going to lean this way or this way. And variable amount of these leaves are going to make electrical contact that will be transmitted through the resistors. That's what's going to happen. Now notice it used 2 of these contact sets, one in one direction, one in the other. God used it in just with device. And I tell you, engineers love it when you can do things more efficiently. Let's look again the tank stabilizer. And what this image shows is the tank is on level ground, and you can see the device from the gyro right equally between the two sets of the contacts. But when the tank leans one way, the gyro that doesn't move then has to force some of these like comb teeth over to one side. And depending on how many of them are contacted, a different signal strength is produced. And if the tank leans in the other direction, it goes in the other side. All righty. That is fantastic. And it was worthy of a presidential citation. And German tanks had to stop and shoot, but ours could sometimes continue moving. All righty. This is what we have. How do we keep our eyes on target? And I want to remind you that as you put your head through those movements that I invited you to do, you nonetheless kept your eyes on the target of the screen, the text perhaps even. And so when you, for instance, rotated your head to say no, it wasn't like your eyes were fixed in your head and you actually began scanning to the sides, the different of the room that you're in. Instead, your eyes stayed trained on target. How does that happen? In our internal ear, we have the semicircular ducts, the semicircular canals, and in them they're filled with a fluid. And in one part of each of these three, which are orthogonically spaced so that they're in right angles to each other, we have the anterior, the lateral, and the posterior semicircular ducts. We're going to ignore entirely hearing, which is with, yeah. We're just going to look at the semicircular canals. But before I go to the next screen, I want you to remember that I showed you where the utricle and the saccule are as part of this. Now let's go on. Up of one of the semicircular canals. It is filled with endolymph fluid. And at one point of it, it has this large area called the ampulla of the semicircular canal, and a structure called a cupula, which I will tell you to think of as a large sail, so that it feels pressure, resistance on it from the endolymphatic fluid. At the base of the cupula are tiny cells that have tiny hair filaments, and these are all engaged and collect to produce a nerve signal. We're going to look at this area now more closely. This is a hair cell, and this is what is protruding into the cupula that is inside the lymphatic fluid. Now, I told you Hanna did it with two sets of resistors in opposite directions because he started from zero and would have to create a signal in one way or the other. Here, what we have is a cell that has always a humming level of signal. And what becomes important then is the increase of signal or the decrease of signal. By doing it in this manner, one device can produce the signal. And here what it shows is that if this was bent in one direction, it increased the ionic, or let's say the signals, and greater neurotransmitter was released to create a stronger signal. But if it bent in the other way, it simply reduced the default value and would produce inhibition. Let's look at it now inside our head in a certain way. Consider this a top-down view. So here you have the lateral semicircular canal, the one that's pointing outward, with an axis going through the top of the head down the spine. And we can turn our head to the left or we can turn our head to the right. But the important thing is that because these are in mirror fashion anatomically, though the relative fluid movement by inertia, the fluid doesn't want to move. It's everything else that moves. Let me pause and say, think of a cup of coffee, it's black, you put in some creamer, don't stir it yet. Now you've got this funky cloud of half and half in your coffee. If you take the cup and rotate it, what you find is the coffee inside is not turning. The cup is turning around it. That's the phenomenon that's happening here. The liquid keeps it still, and the cupola is forced to bend into the fluid. And so on one side, it produces inhibition, and on the other side, it produces excitation. Now we've got that signal. Where's it going to go next? Well, we go to our motor generator, an afferent signal generator in the midbrain. Down here, we have the spinal cord, and above all of this, we have portions of the midbrain. And it shows that where in the midbrain is what's called the vestibular nucleus. A nucleus is kind of the body of these nerves, and is a place where they collect in high numbers, and a lot of processing goes on. In this image, we have cross views. This is an actual micrograph of an actual sample, and here a diagram. And what we see are things called the medial vestibular nucleus and I can't, on my screen, this is getting kind of small here. But you have these places, and this is where the signaling is happening. And right here, we see a cross section in the midbrain of where that is found. Moving along, we have to have our actuators. All right. In the tank, it's the hydraulic pump and pipes and all of that. We have to have our actuators. Our actuators are the extraocular muscles of the eye. There are 6 of them. And we have to have the nerves that bring the impulses to perform these things. So we're going to speak of the lateral rectus muscle, which has been cut away here to show what's on the other side, and the medial rectus muscle that's on the inside. So you might think when this muscle contracts and shortens, it's going to turn this eye inward towards the nose. But when this one contracts, it's going to pull the eye outward, away from the nose. Let's look at this in a schematic version now, the whole process. The head turns. Consequently, the fluid staying still is brushed by the cupola, but on one side, it creates inhibition, and on the other side, excitation. These senses are moved along by nerves to processing centers, which we call a nucleus, that then gives signal to perform functions on the same side of an eyeball, but anatomically the opposite side. So this is the medial side of one eye. The nose is right here. And this is the lateral side of the other eye. And so what we find here is inhibition of the muscles here, the lateral rectus, and inhibition of the medial rectus, and concomitant excitation of the medial rectus and lateral rectus on the opposite sides of those eyes. Now, you may have wondered that or thought that a movement happens because a muscle contracts, and that is true. But it also has to require that the opposite muscle release. And so you can hold your arm in any position only because the 2 opposed muscles have decided, they've agreed, they're going to have equal tension on their duty. But if one muscle becomes paralyzed, for instance, your bicep, if your bicep becomes paralyzed, your arm will open to its maximum extent because the tricep is always under tension And so the arm is open to its maximum. So what I'm trying to say with all of that is that this movement of an eye to one side or the other requires coordination of both excitation and contraction of one muscle and inhibition and relaxation of the opposed muscle. And this must be done in a fine-tuned fashion, smoothly. In fact, doctors will open and close your arm, open and close your leg when there may be a suspicion of neurologic disease like Parkinson's, just to see if the muscles are agreeing with each other that they're going to move in a smooth fashion. And when we find instead that a patient's arm or leg is showing what we call cogwheeling, ratcheting, we know that that's a sign that neurologic damage is occurring and Parkinson's is developing. So it's all very, very fine-tuned. Anyway, what we're seeing here then is an irreducibly function. It has to have sensors. It has to have means of transmitting what it has sensed, to processing centers that interpret and then produce other signals that are executed by parts in order for all of this to occur. If you take out any one section, the whole function fails. This is what is meant by irreducible complexity. Having looked at this for our eyes and for the tank gun stabilizer, I find that there's a fifth required part. Both systems need a targeter or user to decide what to focus on. Consider that right now where you're sitting, you're in an environment that has a multitude of objects. You could be staring at any one of them, but you have decided to give importance to the screen that you're viewing. In the same way, you know, the tank gunner or tank commander has to pick a target. And our mind decides what to look at. And only minds can determine relative value among an environment of innumerable objects for viewing, even if a less mind than that of a human. So the important thing here is that a targeter is transcendent to the parts of the mechanism. Alrighty. Now, if the vestibular ocular reflex, which is what we've been examining, is an example of a complex and integrated system of systems that requires all parts to function together for the provision of the benefit and is therefore irreducibly complex. It is problematic to account for this system under the neo-Darwinian view of life, which requires target-less, minuscule, and independent stepwise development. Now, some other of my titles available at Reasons to Believe include examinations of the circle of Willis, an artery that is at the base of the brain, versus an electrical bus. I call that redundant blood supply to the brain, shows good engineering. One that evaluates dead reckoning in human beings. Dead reckoning is the use of accelerometers to measure movement through space as transitional, not rotation, movement through space. And that's what that utricle and secule that I made reference to serves. It's where our accelerometers are found. And I bring up the history of the development of the inertial navigation system for the Apollo program. Humanity's built-in G-suit, the barrel receptor reflex system versus aeronautical G-suit. We share all the same basic features, or I should say, the G-suit that pilots have to wear to keep from fainting shares the same basic features as that found in our anatomy and physiology. It's no gag. Pharyngeal reflex shows intelligent creation. Now, this is a term I've coined because, frankly, I haven't been able to find anything in the literature about it, and I can't remember ever having been taught anything about it in medical school, what I call the gag lacrimal gland reflex. And I compare it to an aviation emergency response. And so there you may find some links and find some interesting reading there. I have other interests, and I'll take a quick sidebar here before moving to my last section. An important challenge to orthodox neo-Darwinism was that of Stephen Meyer's argument regarding biological information carried by DNA, as expounded in his bestseller book, Signature in the Cell: DNA Evidence for Intelligent Design. That got me thinking about information, and this is what I came up with. I understand this is going to be difficult to read on your screens. I'll describe some of it. And again, I invite anyone to hopefully have a copy of my presentation later. But across the top, I have 4 categories of information. I call them reflexive, descriptive, prescriptive, and aesthetic. And down the side, I have some basic terms of their character, their traits, their nature, what I call their range and domain, and some examples. You know, science mostly is about descriptions. It's about measurements, whether they're spatial, temporal, weights, rates, densities, strengths, etc. The nature of it is empirical. I call the range closed, and what I mean when I say closed or open is it exhaustible? I'm looking at a cup of coffee to my side, and I could do some scientific measurements on it. But the point is, I could get to the end of those scientific measurements. I can get to the point where I've done everything there can be done to explore that cup, generally speaking. And so such a subject is closed. And where is the information? What is its domain? It's inherent to the object itself. So here I list several different types, which are all going to be quite familiar to everyone. Reflective information, I call information about information itself. And so it's going to be found inherent to the information system. Things like averages, limits, ranges, permutations, combinations, probabilities, Shannon information, harmonic musical analysis, mean time before failure. All these things depend upon a set of information that already exists. Aesthetic is going to be transcendent in its character. It's opinionated, stylistic, emotional, affective, inspirational, imaginative. It's definitely philosophical in its nature. It is also open. I should say it is open. This is only found from creativity. Any of these artistic pursuits are going to be from intelligent creativity and are going to be this nature. Then we have prescriptive. These are instructions: operative, regulatory, homeostatic, purposed, imperative. This is also open. We can never get to the end of prescriptive information, and it is only found to be of intelligent volition. Here's some examples: a medical prescription itself, blueprints, assembly directions, the use of a thermostat, a musical score, a military plan, a recipe, a lesson plan, sports strategy. Well, this was the only category that made sense to put the biological information carried by DNA. And I have a footnote there that will lead you to an article that discusses this more fully. And this was the very purpose of the categorizations, to see if I could find, well, how and where would DNA go? And DNA can only go here. Now, some will say, some will object, no one invented the information. But my retort is, it fits this description, and the only known source for the generation of such information is from intelligent volition. There's no way you'll ever find a prescription that wasn't written by a doctor in the usual sense, prescription. It had to have come from a doctor. Okay, let me move on. So the big picture take home on information is that information is massless and weightless. Now consider DNA is not mass or weightless because it's a molecule. But information is massless and weightless. All information transcends the medium of its conveyance and or storage. Short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. Many of you know what that means. That's Morse code for SOS, or save our ship, or save or sink, whatever you like it to represent. It's a call for help, known internationally. But let me say again, it doesn't matter if it's flashes of light, sound, arrangements of objects on a beach. It's the triple short, triple long, triple short information that is massless and weightless that conveys the information. That is the information, I should say. Consider Abraham Lincoln on a penny. Yeah, he's represented by copper, but there's nothing copperish about Abraham Lincoln and nothing Abrahamic about the copper. So the information of Abraham Lincoln is transcendent to the copper. DNA and RNA is not information. It is an information storage system. 1 gram of DNA can hold 215 petabytes or 215 million gigabytes of data. And that's equal to greater than 14,300 libraries of Congress. How much is 1 gram? Well, the last time you took 2 extra strength Tylenol or acetaminophen, which are 500 milligram tablets, you were taking 1 gram. So consider that weight in DNA, and you'll understand you could store over 14,300 libraries of Congress. There are calculations that consider DNA to be the theoretical limit of efficiency of data storage. DNA RNA stores and conveys prescriptive biological information. All right, now we're going to change gears, and now we're going to look at examples of some very special information, complex, specified information. Folks, it's very easy to complex information. It's entirely another bump into complex, specified information. In every case, you're going to see that what makes it specified is reference to other than its own, reference to something outside. Let's look at these. And now we're going to move from mostly my text-based presentation to mostly photographs. Here is the Mantis religiosa, the praying mantis. Probably pun intended, because though it holds its arms like it's kneeling and praying in the bench of a church, this is one of the most carnivorous little guys that preys upon other things. And here we have 2 versions of it. One, the pink orchid mantis. And it should be obvious what is specified information here. And next to it, we have a praying mantis camouflaged like lichen. What's lichen? A composite organism made of fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. Here it's called foliose morphology. Incidentally, this is not a parasite on plants. So, but you have here are the arms, the head, some antenna. Wish we had a bigger picture of a praying mantis. Here's its tail, which it always uses with its 2 legs, buttress itself as it moves to attack things. This is the larva or caterpillar of Hemeroplanus triptolemus moth. Now, unfortunately, it has already begun its amazing capability. If you consider this is already engaging this process, but you may be able to see light blue right there and right here. Certainly on this image, you can see this light blue. Those are actually legs of the caterpillar's underside at the back end of this caterpillar. And so here you can see collections of legs and the process by which, when threatened, it will release the back end of its body and inflate it in such a manner that it ultimately looks like a snake head. Consider the detail. Images of scales, images of an eye, images of pit or thermal sensors here, almost like a viper. All right. And all of this just deflates, here it is hardly inflated, and disappears when the caterpillar doesn't feel the need for it. Consider this as a morphologic mimicry that is astounding. And we're going to look at art more closely now, because there's some things I want everyone to realize. All right. This is a very famous painting, Leonardo da Vinci, The Last Supper, Christ and the Apostles. If you've ever had art lessons, you learn very early about perspective, and the place everyone starts is 1-point perspective. What do I mean by that? Let's put in lines here that show how Da Vinci used the environment to convey a sense of depth by vanishing things to appear to vanish in the distance. And the point where they vanish is also the horizon of the picture. And artists can make your view, the viewer's position, wherever they want. They may want to elevate you so that you're seeing things from high above. They'll put the horizon high. They may want it to look like you're laying your head on a street looking at mountains far in the distance, and they'll put the horizon very low. Here, though the entire painting is elevated on a wall over a door, of course, that door wasn't there when Da Vinci painted it. He has decided he wanted everybody to be looking at it basically at face height. And what you see is that, not so unsubtly, he's made the very face and Christ, very face and head of Christ as where the vanishing point is for this 1-point perspective. And here's where you note that it's a real artist. Jesus's head is not exactly in the center of this image, right? Because if it was, it'd be like, oh, come on. All right, 1-point vanishing perspective is one manner in which artists may recreate the sense of depth, the illusion of three-dimensionality on a 2-dimensional surface. Now let's explore some other types. Here is a picture of my hand holding a leaf I found in my backyard. I named this Eddy del Rio. But I just want to take a moment to look at reality more closely. Obviously, this is a curled, dried up leaf, but notice how dark it is here. Notice that it is lighter here. Notice that there is some shadowing right here and a little bit right there. Notice that this side is darker than this side. Notice as you look at this vein that the upper and left upper side of it is bright, but right below it, there's a dark edge. You can see that sort of here too. This vein has a darker one side and a brighter underside. very, very dark here, less dark here, shadowing. So this is a more advanced manner of indicating depth by an artist, shadowing, controlling the different light and darkness to give a sense of depth. Okay, basic lesson over. Let's move on. This is the Nymphalidae Killima inachus. This is a bug. Look, here's its legs. Here's its antennas. Here's its head. These are its 4 wings. If we look carefully, we see tremendous signs of shadowing, of depth. And in particular, in this one, it looks like there's mildew on the relief. Even over here, some of it as if it were eaten away, and some holes and rot. Folks, this is extremely artistic. So artistic. I can't begin to imagine how to calculate its occurrence by chance. Let's continue. We are going to get to doing that for something simpler. This is Europea meticulodina. Now, this moth has the appearance of a curled dry leaf. Look at the darkness right here. Look at the brightness of this area. Look at the vein having a dark side, adjacent, abrupt to a bright side. The general darkness here, but brighter part here, as if this is pointing up. Notice how this portion has a darker side on the bottom, a brighter side along the top, really, really dark under here. That is beautiful. Folks, these are flat wings. Here they are viewed from the back. Totally flat wings with that canvas of curled image on it. Here it is with all its 4 wings. Just some more show and tell. Let's continue. This is a real snake, but I want us to look carefully the way artists would view it. We got a little bit of shadowing right here underneath its chin, upper part of its neck. You've got brightness, cheek. You have darkness right here under its chin. Not to mention all the features of scales and whatnot, but also right here, there are streaks, bright highlights, including a dot right on its eye of highlight. And I don't know if this is some coburst. It looks like it's got some shadowing here of flaring of its neck. Okay, that's a real snake. Look at these 2 snakes. Attacus Atlas. This is a moth. Again, a moth. We're going to look at this more carefully. Here we have shadowing under the neck, under the chin, and a portion of it down the neck. We have some color here that is then adjacent to a darkness, as if to delimit the region of the actual neck. We have a line that appears to be a jawline. We have eyes, we have scales with highlights. Notice this. Fascinatingly, this is a strict side view. Not so this one. Here you can see coming down and beyond a center line, the appearance of part of the left side of this snake appearing image. Again, shadowed consistently, brighter. The other wing has an appearance of darkness and brightness that gives it a curved cylindrical suggestion that might be connected all the way up. I think this is art at its highest level. I don't know how I could begin to calculate the probability of this degree of art happening by chance. Let me continue. These are some red fire ants, real ants. Now, we're going to look at this one here more closely. I'm going to zoom in and rotate the picture. And here's what it looks like. Here we see obvious head, portions of thorax, abdomen, and that's a real ant, a real red ant. Let's look at this image. You should be seeing on this fly what appears to be ants, black ants on its wings. Let's look more closely, or more generally. Now, here's an image that has actually two species. The Gonorrhea tridens is the right image, okay? And what I'm going to explore more is the Xanthocura, and we don't know whether it's Insecta or Tetraspina species, but this is the genus, and that's what's on the left. And these are found at Citizen Science Platform for Wildlife, a global community of nature enthusiasts that photograph and learn about wildlife. And we're going to talk about compound vision, which flies. And I would really recommend you visiting presentation about compound eyes and the mosaic pixelated vision that insects have that use compound vision. Now, in this image, which I showed you first, I want you now to note the reflections on the wings. So this is glare, streaks, blobs of various degrees on the membrane, the clear membrane of this fly from the natural environment. Now we're going to look more carefully at this image here. I'm going to invert it, flip it, and magnify it, and this is what we come to. Now, I hope you had drawn one of those ants I asked you to, but if you did, how does your picture compare with this? Again, that's a rhetorical question. And what part of this ant image is non-ant? Okay, it's not in the genes of any ant. Any ant. Hopefully you know where I'm going with that question. And that is these white dots. These are highlight spots. Now, I find this utterly incredible, and I wanted to explore this. Now, this is a simple enough image that I could begin to think of how I might be able to calculate the probability of something like this happening strictly by random chance events. And so what I did was blow it up and print it. And boy, that was wonderful because the picture becomes very pixelated when that happens. And I can see individual squares of images. And what I did was I outlined each of these highlights in what I thought was a best fit square. And so this one turned out to be 5 by 5 pixels, 3 by 3 pixels, 4 by 4, and one right here, 3 by 3. Demarcated what I thought would be body mark, pencil. And then having done the square, I simply extended in Y directions, whatever dimension was. So this was 5 by 5. So every 5 pixels, I would draw my graph. I would extend it. Here I did it by 3, 4 by 4, 3 by 3. And that, what is the simple probability of one square being found on this mass? I counted up all the total black hairs. I came up with 80. I counted the edges that had partial images. I came up with 19. And then I said, well, for every one that's almost all filled, there's one that is barely filled, and I just divided the number by 2, came up with total number of squares for the abdomen of 89.5 squares. And so that 1 square represents 1 over 9.5. Then I asked myself, but however, in general, actually, Marine is going to bring this better. So I calculated the fraction of space occupied by the dot, and then I multiplied that by the question, is it proportional? And is it light consistent? Let's go back. Larger spheres have larger dots. This one's smaller. This one's medium size, and it was 4 by 4, larger than 3 by 3, less than 5 by 5. Is it light consistent? Notice, so if this, let me go back to the prior question. If this dot were this big of white, that would not make sense. That would be too great a reflection for a sphere of that size. Okay, then is it light consistent? If this dot were up here, this dot were down here, this dot was over here, it would be not indicating a single source of light. It would not be what we generally see in nature, and so it would be what I termed light inconsistent. I assigned conservative values to these admittedly opinionated questions, and I would have said, you know, if it's not consistent, we'll just give it a value of 1. If it is consistent, that's highly improbable. I don't know how improbable, we'll just give it 50%. It would likely be much less than that, because how many different places could this dot go and still be light consistent? Many, many more places. So I thought I was being conservative. And so what I came up with was the fraction of the space occupied by the dot times whether it was proportional or not, and whether it was light consistent or not. And I used the numbers of the fraction of the area times a half for each body part, and came up with this number. 1 in 2.6 times 10 to the 9th. That's 1 in 2.6 billion chances for that wing, for random things to place the white dot the way it did. For 2 wings, however, we have to square the number. And so that brings us now to 1 in 6.8 times 10 to the 18th power. What is that? That number is 1 in 6.8 million possibilities. To compare, the chances of winning the Mega Millions lottery is 1 in 320 million. Therefore, there are 22.8 billion more chances of winning that lottery than getting those reflective dots by an undirected natural process. The Earth is only 1.4 times 10 to the 17 seconds old. The universe is only 4.3 times 10 to the 17 seconds old. That means we would have to have 47.9 of this universe's existence in seconds to equal the improbability of those dots happening by chance. Now, that bug I've been showing you is a fruit fly. It's only 3 millimeters in length. The wings are about 1.8 millimeters. So if you have a dime and look at it right now, the wings are about the distance from Roosevelt's chin to the beginning of the word in God we trust. The whole bug is about the edge of the coin to Roosevelt's chin. This is extremely minute. But the best of it is, and I'm going to admit, this is provocative, alternative methods of measuring these odds and likelihood, but let's move forward. Ask more deeply, who or what is capable of appreciating these pseudo-reflective proportional highlights, making the illusion of three-dimensional sphere surfaces on a two-dimensional surface. Not insects. I'll support that in a moment. Not birds, not reptiles, not sea creatures, or any mammal, but one, you and me. The dots on the ant's body parts on the wings of the 3mm fruit fly is entirely superfluous and meaningless to all creation, except Homo sapiens sapiens using advanced technology. I submit that it therefore cannot be the result of Darwinian evolution and thus betrays the mind and artistry of a creator. Now, I've already engaged atheists on their comeback about how it presumably increases survivability or mating, benefits, etc. And I'm going to talk a little about that. So why do I think this? One, the limits of compound eyes. So people tend to look at this and think, well, that's what the other fruit fly is seeing, or that's what the praying mantis is seeing, or that's what the ant is seeing. No, they don't see that because of their compound eyes. They actually have poor acuity. What they gain is the benefit of an enormous field of view with their compound eyes. I have some articles that I searched on this very subject. And one from the Journal of Comparative Physiology in 1977 called The Acuity of Compound Eyes, Physical Limitations in Design. It's very rigorous mathematically. Let me go on. This is the second reason why I feel this is true. The actual reflections on the wings, like I showed you, I said, remember these streaks, the glare, the blobs, that obscures and spoils the mimicry of ant, and even more so of those reflective dots. The wings move. So if seen, what matters, ants, we're not going, nothing's going, that's an ant. I think that's a spherical abdomen because there's a reflective dot on it. And finally, the likelihood of occurring by chance is asymptotically, borrowing there from medicine, asymptotically zero. Not to mention, I never tried to figure what the calculation would be for the ant figure. No, just the dots on them. That's all I could manage, is an attempt to calculate the dots. I couldn't begin to calculate the ant figure, and God help me, I could never begin to calculate the view of snakes on moth wings or curled leaves on moth wings. That is so transcendental that I couldn't begin to imagine how to do it. Alrighty. Proverbs 25:2 says, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter. Now, remember back on my info table, the character and domain of aesthetic information, respectively, are transcendence, the domain or source, intelligent creativity. I think we are viewing aesthetic information from an artist who wishes to communicate. By the way, all artists wish to communicate. They wish to share their creation. Now, though I am no king, it is my honor to reveal to you the God dots, his simple, partially hidden, but extraordinarily plain declaration of existence. Again, this is provocative, and I really do invite critique and engagement on it. What we've been talking about or showing is mimicry. Well, how do evolutionists think of this? Here's from Wikipedia. In evolutionary biology, mimicry is an evolved resemblance between an organism and another object, often an organism of another species. Mimicry may evolve between different species or between individuals of the same species. But such begs the question, We don't have evidence of this having evolved. The mechanism has never been described. It is simply asserted that it has happened. Somehow, the evolutionary mechanism is presumed to have led to an unrelated and unknown, but clearly recognizable target. It evolved because evolution. That's a tautology. So the level of artistic technique we see is formidable. Careful scrutiny of details. Remember the shading on the moth, whose wings look like a curled leaf, supports the strong suspicion of an intelligent and creative artistic agent. Therefore, I prefer as more reasonable the alternative theory of a creator God who is literally showing off his transcendental technique with elan and even some humor. Consider, if you're a caterpillar, you want camouflage from birds who love to eat you. There's something that you could be that will guarantee that birds will never give you the time of day. Yeah, you might look like leaves, you might look like twigs and sticks, but who knows? There might be one that's looking for something just like that for their nest. Here's what every bird will always, always, always ignore. Bird poop. Caterpillar, this is a caterpillar of the giant swallowtail found just about everywhere in North America. Papilio crescentis. So yeah, do I think God has a sense of humor? You've often heard it said in audiences, well, just look at the nose of the person sitting next to you. But I give you bird poop camouflage as God going, I have a sense of humor, people. All right, now if you've gained some understanding about complex, specified information, then let's see how you do with this. Quick, what is utterly disturbing about this picture?
Gosh.
Okay, hopefully you're catching on that this Holstein milk cow, nothing wrong with her udders. That sure will look Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, North America. So you should have had a reaction, an intuition that said, this complex data is specified. If you had to do the math to describe and create with a program the pattern of markings on any cow, they would in general be equally complex. But what makes this different is its specification to something other than itself. All right. And that's what I see over and over when I see these things in nature. What's this? Oh, dear me. Some of you may have seen this electron micrograph of where the back legs of this plant hopper meet. It's absolutely geared. Now, here's the thing. The adult of this critter doesn't have these, just the nymph stage. And why? Well, we've all seen it. When we had our babies, and we've seen others' babies, infants, newborns, they don't move their extremities well. In fact, the extremities seem to be totally disconnected one from the other, having their own mind of when and how to move. But in this critter, in its early stages, when its neurologic system is not fully capable yet, and it wants to turn on the defense to jump away, the back legs are going to produce a coordinated movement that will enable it to jump well. And that's why these gears are there. And as its neurologic system develops and matures and its capacity increases, it no longer needs this and they go away. This is fantastic. All right. So we have sort of discussed a few of these the four miracles of atheism, but really it's the four miracles of naturalism, the worldview that holds on the question, what is ultimate reality? That it is material and that there is no God. So atheism is part of the answer to the question that the worldview question for naturalism. Getting something from nothing. And we're not going to unpack that now. Getting life from non-life. That's the whole subject of abiogenesis. Getting order from chaos. And then getting the immaterial from physical matter. There are some cracks in the armor. I mentioned Antony Flew. Antony Flew was an atheist philosopher extraordinaire. He even would debate C.S. Lewis in the Socratic Club over at Oxford. Goes way back. If anyone has engaged you saying, I'm not going to believe there's a God until you prove it to me with evidence, they are using Antony Flew's thesis. But he was an interesting man. He had a lifetime commitment to go where the evidence led. He changed to believing in the existence of a God. That happened in 2004 when he changed his allegiance to deism. In late 2006, he joined several other academics in Britain to say, you know, we should teach intelligent design in the schools. In 2007, in an interview, he said again that his deism was a result of his, quote, growing empathy with the insight of Einstein and other noted scientists that there had to be an intelligence behind the integrated complexity of the physical universe, as well as an insight that the integrated complexity of life itself, which is far more complex in the physical universe, can only be explained in terms of an intelligent source. He also restated then that he was not a Christian theist. He was a deist, delta. And that is categorically different from being an atheist. Some more cracks in the armor. Thomas Nagel is an atheist American philosopher and emeritus university professor of philosophy and law at New York University, which, by the way, has been for a long time our nation's center of academic philosophy, where he taught from 1980 to 2016. His main areas of philosophical interest were philosophy of mind, political philosophy, and ethics. In his 2012 book, Mind and Cosmos, note the subtitle, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. In that book, Nagel argues against a materialist view of the emergence of life and consciousness, writing that the standard neo-Darwinian view flies in the face of common sense. Now, he basically says we need to continue exploring until we find something in nature that ensures the development of life and that ensures the development of transcendental consciousness from matter. All right. Many of you know Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, German theoretical physicist. He discovered energy quantum, a Nobel Prize for it. He said all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. So back to our beginning. Now, Captain Jeff Strecker had begun to derail the conversation about God with questions about evolution. He'd had some science classes, you know. Our response? If we were there, we should have said, really, I would love to hear more about what some of your questions were. And then later, we could maybe share the quote from Max Planck and ask, What do you think about that? Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you, and yet do it with gentleness and reverence. After his enlisted service ended in April 2000, Strecker went on to graduate from seminary and earned a PhD and became commissioned as a chaplain and served multiple tours in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq. After serving in the military, Captain Strecker became a pastor and author. This is Darwin putty. Man, it fixes anything. Giant holes with ease. Works like magic. So apply it generously. Thank you all for your attention. That concludes my presentation.
Let me close in prayer, and then we'll release everyone to their Saturday afternoons. And thank you again for a really wonderful presentation.
You're very welcome, and it was my privilege. Thank you.
Father God, we are amazed at your thoughtfulness and your artistry and things that you've done that we are only beginning to scratch the surface of in our knowledge and our research and our scientific endeavors. And yet you also, you know, you're the God of all that intelligence, but you're also a God of simplicity that we can appreciate simply the fact that you love us and that you've done all of these things for us and for your creation. And whether it's simple or complex, you are the God of all of it. And we're just amazed to be able to sit at your feet in a sense and to learn what you've done and that unfolds before us as we go forward. And you've invited us into your creativity, and you've given us similar creativity and the ability to invent things that really aren't inventions at all, even though it seems that we've created things that didn't previously exist, and yet we find some of those things in nature that you already invented. You already created the paths for discovering those things. And we just praise you. We give you thanks. We're grateful for all that you've done. And we're thankful for the presentation that was given today, and pray that you would make it fruitful in defense of knowledge of you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again.
Amen. Thank you, folks. Have a great weekend.